Across religions, one question endures: who can be saved in the eyes of God? Part 1. The question of salvation outside the Church, where we tackle the most profound and often most challenging questions facing the Church today. Our focus shifts from the internal debates of liturgy to the external, universal question of humanity's relationship with the divine. What is the official teaching of the Catholic Church regarding those who follow other religious traditions, such as Islam, Buddhism, or Hinduism? Can they achieve salvation outside the visible bounds of the Church established by Jesus? This question is not merely an academic exercise, it is a moral imperative, rooted in the core of Christian theology. If Jesus is the sole mediator between humanity and the Father, and if the Church is the universal sacrament of salvation, how can billions of people who live good lives, follow their consciences, and worship sincerely under different names and rituals be reconciled with the Christian claim to unique truth? For centuries, the answer was stark and uncompromising, encapsulated in the famous phrase, Extra Ecclesiam Nulla Salus. Outside the Church there is no salvation. This statement, while seeming harsh to modern ears, was born of profound conviction. If Jesus provided the means for salvation, then rejecting that means, the Church was to reject salvation itself. However, the world has always been far more complex than a theological formula. The Catholic Church's understanding of its mission and its relationship to the non-Christian world has undergone one of the most significant and profound developments in the last half-century. A development that radically reshaped how Catholics view their neighbors and their missionary duties. Our journey will trace this evolution, moving from the rigid historical boundaries to the nuanced open dialogue initiated by the Second Vatican Council. We must analyze the key documents that defined this change, primarily Lumen Gentium and Nostra Aetate, and explore the specific theological acknowledgements the Church makes regarding Islam's reverence for the single Creator and Buddhism's profound wisdom. Furthermore, we will confront the most controversial attempt to reconcile these truths: the concept of the anonymous Christian. The objective of this deep dive is to provide a meticulously detailed, historically grounded, and theologically precise answer to a question that every thoughtful Christian must face. Where does the fullness of truth reside? And what is the spiritual status of those who earnestly seek Jesus outside the confines of the Roman Catholic Church? Understanding the Vatican's view on other faiths is not just an exercise in ecumenism, it is an act of theological self-definition. Part 2. The Old Thesis, Extra Ecclesiam Nulla Salus. To grasp the revolutionary nature of the post-Vatican II teaching, one must first firmly understand the strength and ubiquity of the classic theological position, Extra Ecclesiam Nulla Salus. Outside the Church there is no salvation. This formula dominated Catholic thought for centuries and served as the driving force behind all missionary activity. The origins of this stringent dictum are traced back to the early Church Fathers, most notably Saint Cyprian of Carthage in the 3rd century. Cyprian, amidst a schism, declared, "He can no longer have Jesus as his father who does not have the Church as his mother." He solidified the powerful metaphor of the Church as Noah's Ark. Just as salvation from the flood was only possible inside the ark, salvation from eternal damnation was only possible inside the visible, physical structure of the Church, the spouse of Jesus. To be outside was to be consigned to the waters of destruction. This position was reiterated and formally incorporated into magisterial teaching over the centuries. Key moments include the Fourth Lateran Council, 1215, which stated, "One universal church of the faithful, outside of which no one at all is saved," and the Council of Florence, which declared that no one, including pagans, Jews, heretics, and schismatics, can share in eternal life unless they have adhered to the church before the end of their lives. These pronouncements were not intended as cruel exclusions, but as clear, definitive statements about the singular divine purpose of the church founded by Jesus. The rigor of this formula stemmed from a singular theological conviction. Jesus Christ established a visible means for the communication of grace and truth, the church. The sacraments, the apostolic succession, and the fullness of revealed truth are contained within its visible boundaries. Therefore, separation from this divinely instituted vessel was considered separation from the source of grace itself. The dictum served as a crucial defense of the necessity of the Church and fueled the heroic efforts of missionaries who believed they were literally rescuing souls from destruction. However, theological reflection never entirely rested on the absolute visible boundary. Scholastic theologians, such as Thomas Aquinas, introduced the crucial distinction between votum, desire, and res. In fact, they theorized about the baptism of desire. Baptismus flaminis, positing that a person who earnestly desires the truth and would have explicitly sought baptism, had they known its necessity, could still be saved. While this nuanced development opened a small door for the invincibly ignorant, those who, through no fault of their own, were genuinely unaware of the gospel, the overwhelming external teaching remained fiercely defined by the visible boundaries of the Church, setting a theological stage that demanded reform in the face of modern global realities. Part 3: The Shift, Vatican II, and Lumen Gentium. The definitive and monumental shift in the Catholic Church's understanding of its relationship with non-Christian religions came with the Second Vatican Council. The Council sought to engage the modern world, not just condemn it, and this required a complete reassessment of the Church's self-identity and its view of those outside its fold. The key document that articulated this change was the dogmatic Constitution on the Church, Lumen Gentium, Light of the Peoples. Lumen Gentium remains the cornerstone of modern Catholic ecclesiology, theology of the Church. While it firmly reasserted that the Catholic Church is the visible subsistence of the Church founded by Jesus, it introduced a revolutionary vocabulary regarding those who are linked to or related to the Church in various ways. It maintained that the Church is still necessary for salvation, but it broadened the definition of how people might be connected to this salvation. The Council acknowledged that the elements of sanctification and truth are found outside the visible structure of the Catholic Church. This was the theological breakthrough. These seeds of the word, or semina verbi, are present in other Christian denominations and, crucially, even in non-Christian religions. For the first time in magisterial teaching, the Church recognized that these elements are not mere human inventions, but gifts of Jesus working through means beyond the Church's visible control. Regarding non-Christians, Lumen Gentium stated, "Those also can attain to everlasting salvation, who through no fault of their own do not know the gospel of Jesus Christ or his Church, yet sincerely seek Jesus, and, moved by grace, strive by their deeds to do his will as it is known to them through the dictates of conscience." This statement is the full, official recognition of invincible ignorance and the baptism of desire as actual paths to salvation for those unaware of the gospel. It established that salvation is mediated through Jesus, but the possibility of receiving that mediation is vastly broader than just explicit membership in the Catholic Church. This represented a pivotal move from a theology focused solely on the visible boundaries of the Church to one focused on the universal power of Jesus' saving grace. It was a transition from a position of exclusive judgment to one of inclusive dialogue, forcing the Church to look for the truth and goodness already present in the hearts and practices of billions across the globe. The relationship with Islam, Nostra Aetate, building directly upon the foundational principles of Lumen Gentium, the Council produced the concise yet powerful declaration Nostra Aetate, in our time, which specifically addressed the Church's relationship with non-Christian religions. While the entire document is important, its analysis of Islam remains perhaps the most significant and sensitive component of modern interreligious dialogue. The declaration established a path of profound theological respect for Islam, stating, "The Church also looks with esteem upon the Muslims. They adore the one Jesus, living and subsisting in himself, merciful and all-powerful, the creator of heaven and earth, who has spoken to humanity." This recognition that Muslims worship the same God of Abraham, the one indivisible and sovereign creator, is the theological bridge. It is a shared monotheism, a common ground that transcends all subsequent doctrinal differences. Nostra Aetate highlights specific areas of spiritual convergence. Submission to Jesus. Both faiths share a commitment to submission to the will of God. Islam literally means submission. Veneration of the prophets. Muslims revere many of the same Old Testament figures recognized by the Church, and they hold Jesus in high esteem as a great prophet, though not the Son of God, and revere his mother Mary, who is accorded a place of honor in the Quran. Moral practices. The Church acknowledges the moral seriousness of Muslim practices, including prayer, fasting, Ramadan, almsgiving, and the dedication to justice and family life. The Vatican's approach is to minimize the theological chasm by emphasizing the shared roots and moral aspirations. Subsequent papal magisterium has reinforced this, with Pope John Paul II and Pope Francis consistently emphasizing dialogue, mutual respect, and working together for peace. However, the dialogue is not without its tensions. The central, unbridgeable doctrinal difference remains the Muslim rejection of the divinity of Jesus Christ and the Holy Trinity. For the Catholic Church, these remain non-negotiable revealed truths. Therefore, the relationship is characterized by a respectful pursuit of common ground, shared worship of the Creator, and common moral purpose, while fully acknowledging the profound divergence on the essential identity of Jesus. This careful balance allows for cooperation in society while maintaining theological fidelity. Part 5. The relationship with Eastern religions, Buddhism and Hinduism. The complexities of the interreligious dialogue deepen significantly when addressing Eastern religions, specifically Buddhism and Hinduism, which do not share the Abrahamic lineage or its concept of a single personal creator God. Nostra Aetate provided a specific framework for engagement with these diverse and ancient traditions, moving beyond judgment to seek out the seeds of the word present within them. Regarding Hinduism, the Church acknowledges the profound philosophical speculation, the search for liberation from the anguish of the human condition, and the dedication to asceticism and deep contemplation. The Vatican respects the various ways Hindus explore the divine mystery, including the intense devotion, bhakti, and the search for union with the Supreme Being. The Council encourages Catholics to acknowledge, preserve, and foster the spiritual and moral truths found in Hindu customs and doctrines. The shared ground here is primarily metaphysical and ethical, a common pursuit of ultimate truth and moral order, even if the definitions of God and salvation differ fundamentally from Christian Trinitarian revelation. The approach to Buddhism is particularly striking. The Church noted that Buddhism, in its various forms, recognizes the radical insufficiency of the changing world and offers a path to liberation. The Church expresses deep respect for the Buddhist tradition of meditation and its attempt to attain to a state of perfect liberation or achieve, by their own efforts or through supreme help, supreme illumination. The shared ground here is primarily psychological and ascetic, the realization of human suffering, the importance of inner discipline, and the pursuit of peace. The Christian Church, in its contemplative tradition, such as Carmelite or Carthian monasticism, recognizes a common fundamental human search for detachment from material suffering. The key distinction is that the Church views these traditions as preparations for the gospel. They are not co-equal paths to the same destination. They contain valuable truths, ethical principles, philosophical wisdom, and contemplative practices that guide their adherents toward the one true God. However, the Church maintains that the fullness of truth, the complete, unveiled revelation of the Trinity and the Incarnation, is found uniquely in Jesus Christ and is communicated most fully through the Church. Therefore, the dialogue is one of mutual enrichment and respect, not an admission that all paths lead equally to the Father. Part 6. The concept of the anonymous Christian. Perhaps the most intellectually daring and, simultaneously, the most controversial attempt to reconcile the hard truth of Extra Ecclesiam Nulla Salus with the openness of Vatican II is the theological concept of the anonymous Christian, famously articulated by the Jesuit theologian Karl Rahner, 1984. Rahner sought to address the vast majority of humankind, those living before the gospel was fully proclaimed, or those living today in cultural and geographical contexts where genuine knowledge of Jesus is invincibly ignorant. He argued from the premise that grace is universal and operates everywhere because Jesus died for all people. The saving will of Jesus extends to every human being. Rahner posited that every person, in following their deepest conscience and striving for ethical goodness, is implicitly accepting the grace of Jesus, even if they do not know his name. When a Buddhist seeks enlightenment or a Muslim submits to the will of Allah, Rahner suggests that, in their pursuit of ultimate truth and righteousness, they are performing an act of faith that is, in fact, an anonymous form of Christian faith. They are ontologically in their being Christian, even if they are not explicitly in their profession so. This concept was designed to provide a theological pathway for the salvation of the invincibly ignorant, ensuring that the universality of Jesus' saving was upheld without denying the unique necessity of the Church. However, the controversy surrounding the anonymous Christian is intense. Critics argue that the concept undermines the entire missionary mandate. If a person is already an anonymous Christian, what is the urgency of explicit evangelization? It risks theological relativism, implying that explicit faith and baptism are merely desirable, not necessary. Furthermore, it risks a kind of theological imperialism, labeling the sincere faith of a non-Christian with a Christian category, thereby failing to respect their religious identity on its own terms. While the magisterium has never formally adopted the term anonymous Christian, the theological impulse behind it, the universality of grace and the possibility of salvation outside explicit knowledge, is certainly incorporated into the spirit of Lumen Gentium. Part 7. Conclusion. The fullness of truth. The journey from the strict historical formula of Extra Ecclesiam Nulla Salus to the inclusive dialogue of Nostra Aetate represents one of the most critical theological developments in modern Catholicism. It is a testament to the Church's capacity to look back to its essential truths while looking forward to the modern global reality. The final, synthesized position of the Catholic Church can be summarized by the doctrine of the fullness of truth. The Vatican's view is neither one of exclusion nor one of relativism. The universal reach of grace, The Church firmly believes that the saving grace of Jesus is universally available, operating through means that extend far beyond the visible borders of the Catholic community. Those who, through no fault of their own, are invincibly ignorant of the gospel, but strive to live in accordance with their conscience and the moral truths available to them, are indeed offered the possibility of salvation. The necessity of the Church, despite the universality of grace, the Church maintains that the Catholic Church is the unique vessel where the fullness of God's revealed truth subsists. Other religions contain elements of truth and goodness, seeds of the Word, that are preparations for the gospel. But only the Church contains the complete and unveiled revelation of the Trinity, the seven sacraments, and the authoritative apostolic deposit of faith. In essence, the Vatican views non-Christian religions not as enemies to be conquered, but as paths that point toward the single summit of Jesus. They are rays of light that illuminate a path, but the Church possesses the full, direct source of that light. The dialogue is not about compromise on core truths, but about respectful recognition of the genuine spirituality and goodness that exists outside the visible fold. This stance maintains both the boundless mercy of Jesus and the unique, irreplaceable mission of the Church. The final charge to the faithful remains the same: to engage the world with respect, seek common moral ground, and offer with humility and charity the fullness of truth found in Jesus Christ. The debate over the anonymous Christian highlights the tension between evangelization and dialogue. In your view, how should the Church best balance its missionary mandate to preach the explicit gospel with its respect for the genuine faith found in non-Christian traditions? Share your perspective on this complex theological issue in the comments below.